My friends, today's episode is one of those that just makes my heart sing. You will see in mere moments how powerful today's guest, Lindsay Pera, is on so many levels. We even started the episode and conversation in a new way because I was so excited for her to be on the podcast and to introduce her to all of you and you to her, that Lindsay felt all of that bubbling over energy that came through a little chaotic, I'm not going to lie. And she started us off with a wonderful grounding ritual that I'm going to share with you that led us right into what was one of the most powerful conversations that I've had on the podcast. And even at the end, she gives you some guidance on how to process all of the amazing wisdom that is shared in this wonderful time that we share together. Lindsay is so many things. She is a mystic. She's a psychic. She is a businesswoman. She's one of the wisest people I've met. And Lindsay is just so generous in so many things. In this episode, you will learn about her experience shifting from corporate life into her right livelihood, into her destined path for her business and her personal life. You'll hear about her family and how her experience with building and creating the life and family that she wanted actually has created so much beautiful magic out in the world for so many other people as well. We talk about the whole dynamics, the whole idea that dynamics are shifting so significantly in the world right now, that there are foundations crumbling and there's so many opportunities for new, sustainable, and regenerative futures to be built. And so if you are somebody that is in this space of navigating, here's who I am, here's how I'm different than I've been told I need to be, is that okay? Can I step more into the part of myself that hasn't necessarily been accepted in the past? This episode is for you. This episode is giving you not only the encouragement, but Lindsay drops framework after framework. She drops list after list of processes and exercises that you can use to reflect on the various elements that are happening in your life right now, how you want to operate with alignment and inauthenticity. Let me say that again, with alignment and in authenticity with who you are, your core self. She also talks, which I think is one of the more powerful things that happens in this, about the importance of understanding that so often the language around intuition and self-belief and reinventing the way that we operate with the world around us comes in alignment with some of what we have witnessed to be some of the more destructive elements and conspiracy theories in our society, and the ability to differentiate between what is authentically, intuitively you and what is kind of that darker side of things, that element that is, I always think about it like drinking the Kool-Aid. I know that is something that we've heard many times over. What is it to be understanding who you are, where you belong in this world when the world feels like it's shaking, the ground underneath us is shaking? We're grasping and looking for a place to belong, for a place to trust, and for somebody to listen to. Oftentimes we're looking to voices that we have gone to in the past and hoping that they have an answer in a time where most of us don't have the answer. In this episode, I hope you walk out of it understanding that you within yourself have so many answers. And the idea of operating from abundance, from the self-trust and the belief that you are meant to be who you are, is so much more powerful than operating from fear and divisiveness, operating from this need for certainty instead of the comfort in knowing that curiosity actually allows for you to tap more into who you are, your wisdom, and why you're meant to be here. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm so excited for you to get this opening experience that I kind of wish we could have for every episode moving forward from Lindsay and how she opens the space for us. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Lindsay Pera. Here we go. Oh, I'm so excited you're here. Okay. Most of the time this happens and I'm always like, sorry, my body's so hot, everybody. You know this. I'm sweating. I'm so excited. Okay.
You want me to bring us into unity, you and I?
Oh my God, yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. All right, let's just close our eyes for a moment and we'll actually say hello to your team. Hello, team. Thank you for being out there and for receiving this good work that we're doing together. We'll go ahead and bring all of us into unity of heart and mind, even though some of us will be receiving this in our own divine timing. But together, Nikki and I sit here on this moment in this time, because there's only one place from which we can manifest, and that is right here, right now. So we're going to go ahead and ask any distractions and anything that doesn't serve to go ahead and exit this shared sacred space. We're going to invite forward only those things that truly serve Nikki, her wheel, her rings, her audience, all those ears that are ready to receive whatever magic and weaving comes through this space together. We'll invite in those energies. Let's go ahead and ground that down by taking a couple of deep breaths. Just at your own pace with whatever inhale and exhale feels good to you. And if we're still feeling those flutters, we can even I feel myself putting a little bit of weight on my thigh, maybe even a hand on your heart, just anything to really come present into this moment. And from this place, let's bring ourselves into unity of heart and mind, kind of following the tradition of the early peacemakers and the Thanksgiving address by giving gratitude and thanks to the 8 directions, starting with the east, which is the direction of the rising sun and of hope and inspiration. It's exactly the work that you all do in the world, inspiring, leading. So with gratitude and thanks, we'll invite that good medicine and magic into our circle now. And then to the south, the direction of the summer sun, the life force energy. It's also the direction of sacred commerce and right livelihood. Let's go ahead and invite that good medicine and magic into our circle now. And then to the west is the direction of the setting sun, of the beauty way, of resonance, those energies that attract back to us, that return on energy. It's also said to be the direction of gratitude itself. Let's go ahead and invite that good medicine and magic into our circle now. And then to the north, the direction of the unseen and the not knowing, for all the ways that this conversation will plant seeds for good miracles and magic to come. We give gratitude and thanks, inviting it into our circle now. Now we go to the direction beneath our feet, to Mother Earth. Go ahead and allow yourself to visualize your roots going all the way down as far as you can go to the center of the earth. Feeling your way into your first mother, who held you to her from the very first moment that you came into form in your mother's womb. Not because of anything you promised to do or any contracts you signed, but because of the innate worthiness of your being. Just go ahead and receive that truly, deeply, with gratitude and thanks to the direction beneath our feet. And then turning our attention to the direction above our heads, far beyond the weather and even the sun and the moon, past the cosmos and the archetypal realm. Just gently let your awareness drift as far out into the outer ether realm as you can allow yourself to go. We're actually recording at a really potent time astrologically for wishes and miracles and magic. So this is an excellent time to connect into that outer ethers. So with gratitude and thanks, we invite that good, miraculous medicine and magic into our circle now. And we'll go ahead and draw our attention back down from the heavenly realm, back down into this earthly space, back into the space where you're sitting, where I'm sitting, where each of us are, where we become the intersection of heaven and earth. Allow yourself to journey within the self. This is the 7th direction, where you are the vessel for this experience, without whom we wouldn't be here, right now in this way. Just bring a little extra gratitude to yourself. And then from this place, we turn our attention to the 8th direction, the direction that connects us to all things, connects us to all that has been, all that is, and all that will be. We have a chance to give gratitude and thanks for blessings already on their way. As we come together with our most upright minds, our peacemaker hearts, let's summon those owl eyes and deer ears that help us see and hear things in new ways. And together we'll extend a blanket of gratitude in all directions for things spoken and not spoken. And from this place, our hearts and minds are now one. And we're in unity. Oh, that felt really good. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is bringing me back to the first moment I met you
Oh.
and the event that I met you at, where you had opened the event with this experience of us just really coming into ourselves and being connected with one another. And I didn't really know anybody in that space. And I immediately felt like I knew everybody after that. And I'm just so grateful, because that is, I feel like that's the medicine we need so much more right now than we've been needed in a long time. So, oh, well,
Technology, it's an amazing thing.
it
And
is. It is. And how it can blend together with humanity instead of feeling like it separates itself from it.
yeah.
So, well, first, welcome to Checkbox Other Lindsay. I am beyond grateful that you are here. My goodness. The first thing I usually ask people is to share the Cliff Notes version of their story, the twists, the turns, the aha moments that have led them to where they are right now in this wonderful existence that we have, and have them stepping so fully into who they were meant to be. And so I would love to hear that from you.
Oh, I'm honored to share, and thanks for having me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. I'm a huge fan of yours. I adore every opportunity to be in connection with you. So it's a real honor to be here. So my name is Lindsay Pera, and I am the founder of a company called the Modern Mystics Institute, which is essentially a boutique consultancy, and I can tell you a little bit more about that. But I'm also a mother of 3 children, Sage, Cricket, and Ember, who span 10 years in age, 12 years, 17, and almost 22. I've been married for 25 years to my best friend. We met at UC San Diego in college. We've known each other since we were 18 years old. And I live on a multi-generational eco homestead on the central coast of California in the country, something I never thought I would have done. A girl from Silicon Valley who was raised at the base of Sand Hill in a software family has found her way to the country. And yet still continues to work in technology and business in interesting ways. So my career started at a Big 6 consulting firm. I worked in software development. I worked at startups. Most people tend to make the assumption then that I came out of business school and came in as an analyst, but I actually was a person who came in through knowledge management and IT strategy research. I was actually a French literature major in college. So what I got very good at was reading and assimilating information and communicating information. But I also was a bridge walker. I guess I would call myself from very early on. I knew software and I knew business in my bones because that was the world that I was raised in. But I also knew that I was very different. I perceived people differently. I perceived energy differently. I perceived information differently. And so I learned to mask a lot of that more sensitive knowing side in order to succeed in a traditional business environment. But ultimately, I was overriding some very important subtle voices inside myself that, and not to sound dramatic, but that literally said to me every single day when I walked out the door in my suit and in my heels with my briefcase, said, "Lindsay, this is killing you." And I would think that was just this kind of dramatic, dismissive, I was dismissive to that voice, but it actually did begin to erode my health to the point where I became quite sick with chronic illness around my 30th birthday, and ended up making the decision, as many people do when life backs you into a corner, to take the grand leap. And so I left my career and we moved down to the country. Only I, like so many others, found that the work that was waiting for me, that was maybe seeding that voice, that I had more to do to learn about my purpose and my way to walk in the world, was still waiting for me down in the country, just as it had been in the city. And so that became a series of years of exploration to find my way back to my own definition of chronic wellness, my own definition of right livelihood, and my own path towards really fulfilling my purpose in the world. So ultimately, I feel that I'm on the planet to help shift resources into the hands of change makers. I love business. I do not believe that money and a sacred path are mutually exclusive. I believe in the origins of sacred commerce. I believe in writing a new path forward, post-toxic late-stage capitalism, where we don't extract from each other, but we can actually all rise together. My work in this space started first in volunteering for nonprofits that I believe passionately in when I was still trying to abdicate any of my former life. And then that led to consulting for some organizations that I was passionate about, most notably the Eight Shields Institute. I'll forever be grateful to John Young and his work, Deep Nature Connection Community Worldwide, where I came back into the ability to own and listen to those subtle voices that had been talking to me since I was a little girl.
Mm.
And from there, I started my own software company and ultimately the Modern Mystics Institute, this little boutique consultancy. I run a right livelihood, new paradigm business community called the Mystic Society. I write books. We create an annual publication called the Mystics Almanac. And I continue to this day to work with world changers, leaders, executive teams, healers, business owners, what I like to call sacred CEOs, the ones who are also bridge walkers with one foot in the very traditional world of business, livelihood, medicine, whatever it is, law that they might do, but also one foot in the conscious commerce realm, in the consciousness space, and new paradigm thinkers who really are a part of the movement for change that we're definitely seeing we're ready for and it's time for.
Yes. Oh, so many things. For those of for those of you who are listening, I feel like every time, Lindsay, you speak and you're talking about what is your guiding force and the guiding kind of light of what you're doing, and it's like new news and also so deeply familiar at the same time, that there is this whole body agreement as you're saying all of these things that I just think is so incredibly powerful. And from the first moment that I met you to even right now, where so much of this, like I have been nerding out on Lindsay Pera for years, and still I'm like this big of like all of my, my bodily self and spiritual, everything just feels like it's like, yes, that is exactly what I've witnessed with you, but also I feel like what we're witnessing with the world around us for sure. So the question that I ask everybody when they come on here is to share a time, or if there's more than one time, in their lives where they felt other or different. I heard a couple of them in the Cliff Notes version, but I'd love to open the floor if you have any other stories you'd like to share.
Absolutely. I think this is such a wonderful question for you to return to in your podcast as a touchstone, because so many of us, especially as new paradigm thinkers or change makers, have had that experience in our lives where we all felt like we didn't quite fit.
Yeah.
We didn't quite mesh into whatever world it was we were living in. And so for me, the very first time that I knew that I was intuitive, and I knew that I had a relationship to what we might refer to now as manifestation that was maybe different than my siblings or the rest of my family. I was actually 5 years old. And I quickly got the feedback that so many sensitive people do, which is there isn't a place for that here, and that's not okay. And so I quickly learned that that needed to become internalized and part of my own space, my own secret inner world. And that we use different words, right? When we're talking about what we know or what we think we know in polite company, we can say in a boardroom or in a business meeting, I have a gut feeling, but we can't say my intuition knows, or I believe in my cells, so you start to adapt and mold to the conditioning that's around you. And for me, as a psychic and an intuitive and as a sensitive and a healer, that conditioning started pretty young. And it became a life challenge for me. By the time I was a teenager, I was using alcohol and substances to fundamentally numb my hypersensitivity. So although I was always very what we would call a high functioning, accomplished student, celebrated in my professional endeavors, there was always an element of me needing to contain my knowing and my sensitivity in order to function in the rooms that I needed to function in. And actually, it was the conception of my first child, Sage, that fundamentally shifted that for the first time for me, where I made a conscious choice to be, to not numb and to be present and to walk in my body differently. And he became the catalyst, the miracle, the blessing for me um, to have to sit with what I knew and what I felt. And that is an absolute blessing. It was also incredibly challenging to suddenly become present to a backlog of everything from all those years. So I had to develop new skills. And yes, taking the great leap was one of them, but it's actually something I try to encourage people not to do. I really love supporting people in affecting change from where they sit now. From there, we can go anywhere. I'm just not a huge believer in jump and the net will appear. I've seen more trauma often come from that than if we take organic steps forward. But in my case, without the tools, I did take the grand leap and I did have to find my way to a sensitive's version of the rock bottom in order to rebuild my toolbox, my skill set for how to be a sensitive and intuitive and a feeler in this world that we live in. So I would say it is one of the most consistent themes in my life to feel different and other, and probably one that I still deal with to this day. There are, when you say that everything that I'm saying or what I'm saying is producing a feeling in your body, that's what I call resonance. And I teach to resonance quite a bit. And resonance has within it these components. One is authenticity. That's your authentic self. The second one is congruent, your ability to show up in the world as your authentic self. But the third part is alignment. And that alignment piece is know your audience. So our journey and our challenge, but also our opportunity is how can I align to the room while still be my congruent, authentic self? So I may not be able to show up in all spaces and lead a ceremonial circle or a coming into unity of heart and mind, but I can challenge myself to perhaps find a way to get us there. Maybe it's instead pausing the room for a moment and saying, let's silence our phones and let's just think of something we're grateful for today. You'd be surprised how open the world is right now to actually merging these more and more. And so, yeah, I guess I go off on that tangent a little bit just to say, I think the time for us to be our fully authentic, unique self is now more than ever. And so we need to challenge ourselves in our own stories of that otherness and see if we can't empower and integrate that side in new ways for these times.
I love that on so many levels. There's at this point, Kismet is just like, I'm just used to the fact that there are things parts of my day today that I did not know were like so in alignment with what we're talking about. So my brain has been on this wonderful frequency here, but I felt so significantly 5-year-old Lindsay.
Yeah.
When you were just talking about 5-year-old self, that was like, oh, okay, this is what I'm experiencing, but this isn't necessarily allowed here. And so often we have been taught to numb, whether it be through substances or through other experiences or masks that we put on for our lives, how we survive each and every day, how we survive not only showing up in the world, but showing up in our families, showing up in how we can progress on the acceptable path. For those of you that aren't watching, I'm using wonderful air quotes. And it's such an interesting experience that we're having right now, where so much of our experience in the last couple of years, the only way for you to performatively visually do it was within a nice little rectangle on a Zoom screen. And so there was this need to understand, what parts have you been playing? What costumes have you been putting on?
Yep.
Is it okay to slowly take that off? Because a lot of times you don't even take that off when it's just you, yourself, and you by yourself. So it is such a interesting experience, I think, because when I first was thinking about Checkbox Other, it was I probably in like 2014 or 20 when I was still in corporate, being like, okay, I feel like I'm constantly checking this box. I'm meeting other people where I'm like, that's probably the part of your life, but like, this might not be a place I'm welcome to talk about this yet.
Right. Right.
And it wasn't something, I mean, identity politics, yes, there's always been that word out in the world, but
Yep.
so much of our alignment with our identity, I think part of that's probably social media and how we have to show different parts of ourselves and be very intentional about how we do that, unless or else the world will take its narrative away from you. But it is so interesting how the last, a part of it, I think, is our very American centric, our countries, the national conversation around who we are and who we choose to lead us moving forward, and how we navigate when we have somebody leading our country that makes us all feel the opposite oftentimes of what we believed that this country was. And also the individual and largely collective experience of the air being a threat to our existence. And so
Yep.
all of those things together have made that experience that used to be like a you don't talk
Right.
about those times where you feel ashamed or by yourself or that you don't belong, to now being like, we all feel like this, right?
Yes.
And how important that is. And so I love so much when you were talking about business being something that has been part of your life from the jump, and how it, because I come from a very traditional business background, and I wouldn't even say my parents, not necessarily, I didn't learn in the same way. Both my parents had jobs growing up for sure. My father worked in caregiving and was a soccer coach, and my mom worked in advertising, project management in the printing industry. So my career was very different in the paths that I took. However, there was so much of witnessing and watching what you were supposed to do to have a job. And even, I had family members that were in business and finance. And so as I started stepping into my career, I started learning that business was separating myself from how I showed up. It was about falling kind of the suit with the briefcase, like the stepping into that character, that mold, that kind of androgynous, if not overly masculine dynamic that you have to be in.
Yep.
And so I love so much that you create a very intentional space of saying, this isn't the anti-business. I mean, this is business. Like, business isn't what we've made it to be in this current moment, in this current time of the expression of what business and leadership are, that are, it's funny because I feel like oftentimes when we talk about feminine leadership, women's leadership, it means that masculine leadership is bad.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's how our binary brain works. But the reality is, it's this kind of stretched, I always get weird about using the word toxicity because I think it gets used a lot, but it really is a distorted version that has now become called masculine leadership. And so I'd love to hear from you, because I know new paradigm leadership, I heard that from you. Like, I'd love to hear what that looks like, feels like, kind of why too it is something that is so attuned to feminine leadership, women's leadership, as we talk about these things.
Oh, what a great question. I love talking about, thinking about, and weaving on topics of new paradigm leadership. Um, the thing that's coming to my mind to be spoken in this space right now, for whatever reason, is that one of the huge distinctions between whatever we want to call it, the before leadership and the now leadership, has something to do with looking beyond the bottom line. That somehow we were told that leadership, especially in the space of business, had to do with this zero-sum game where we looked at profitability. That was the primary metric, and that was what drove everything. And in new paradigm business, for me, we're looking beyond that bottom line. I still am a huge fan of profitability. I still am helping people make money. I want money made by the change makers, but I'm also looking at these other P's. I'm looking at the planet. I'm looking at the people's metrics for health. Okay. I'm looking at purpose. Do people feel aligned to the reason that they're on the planet? And I'm looking at these questions of other metrics that should be on the executive dashboard that have nothing to do with anybody's gender or any other labels, but somehow mean that we're no longer extractive and competing with one another. And instead, there is room for everyone's gifts. And literally, we can link arms and move forward in a good way together. So leadership in this moment to me is really landing from that place. Now, I do speak to divine feminine leadership. And one of the places that I start in those conversations is with another P, peacemaking. Peacemaking is at the top of the dashboard for me in new paradigm leadership, because ultimately, if we're honoring the path of the peacemaker, we are inherently not extracting from our Mother Earth. We are inherently not extracting from each other. But ultimately, and this is the one that probably shows up in my own origin story, right? In terms of businesses, not extracting from ourselves. You know, there are a lot of expectations, and especially in very traditional business like software, law, management, consulting, that would tell you, you know, what's expected of you in terms of billable hours. But you know who signs up for that? Me, the individual. You know who got my ass out the door for those 12 or 14-hour days? Me. I became complicit. I'm hearing my dear friend Leanne Mann's voice in my ear saying, we become complicit in our own subjugation. And so for us to wake up from that is to claim the leadership and the sovereignty within ourselves, which is to say, I will begin by not extracting from me. Now, for me, that meant taking this grand leap. I could not find that pathway within the context of that field at that time. Now I help people do it all the time. But at that time, I needed the full detox from the toxicity that we reference. Ultimately, it comes down to the core routines that you set for yourself, your ability to find your own authentic needs and advocate for them, your willingness to allow someone else's needs to be completely opposite your own and still allow for their unique, authentic journey in the world. And then a trust that it is actually our diversity that will make us stronger. That my core routines being different from yours, even in the same organization, actually means that we are creating a stronger ecosystem, not less so. So it's part of, you know, why I love the work I get to do now. I can have a remote team where people manage their own projects, manage their own time, show up for their own needs, because in stopping the pattern of extraction from the self, we interrupt the pattern of extracting from each other. And ultimately, I believe that ripples out to how we engage with our customers, our clients, our suppliers, and the planet that we live on. So for me, leadership is in fact integrated in all of those big picture questions.
Yep. Just taking a minute to soak all that in. Normally I go so fast, just so you I'm like, yes, keep going. You know, one of the things that is so interesting about how we tend to live on a spectrum of this is the way it is and the only way to do it different is the exact opposite. So again, binary dynamics, why so often we're talking about the masculine, feminine, what I talk about is traditional and modern, but oftentimes it's about baby boomers versus millennials versus, generations versus one another, right?
Yeah.
And the ability to, and the peacemaker dynamic, I feel like the bridge walker dynamic, I feel like is so much of what we need in ourselves, right?
Yeah.
How can we tap into those elements of who we are, but elevating the people that naturally kind of step into those spaces and are really comfortable in that in between. It's something that has not necessarily been lauded to the same extent. It's normally the loudest person in the room who can reach the top the fastest, no matter who they had to step on to kind of get there, or the people that will sacrifice everything about themselves so there's hardly any of them left, rather than there being kind of that in between of I can own and honor what I'm able to bring to the party and also make room for other people. It's not one or the other. It's not that in order for me to succeed, you must fail. So as we, the thing that keeps popping into my head is this experience that we had in 2018, where we were sitting at a table, dinner, we were having dinner, and you went around for each person at the table. And it was one of the most fascinating experiences that I have witnessed. And I had known you for at least a year at that point, where there was a moment, feels like it doesn't encapsulate what it was, because it felt so much bigger than a moment, but didn't feel like a super long amount of time, but it was that impactful, where you saw each and every person and kind of, I don't know if the word download feels right or not, but spoke to that person where they were. And there was a reading of sorts. There was kind of this psychic dynamic, but also this like fully present in that like there was such a beautiful connection that didn't feel like I didn't feel voyeuristic for me to be watching that happening in your connection with other people. And it makes me again think of 5-year-old Lindsay, who had this skill and this ability to know and feel and see, and had to shut that off. And then to watch, I mean, how you flipped a light switch on every human being, the ability for them to be seen so thoroughly was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. So I can only imagine, like, I'm thinking of all the amazing people that call themselves your clients, but I also feel like the people that just have had the Lindsay Pera effect in their lives. And so how do you, I mean, I get to watch, right? I get to be the spectator. What is that experience like for you to be the vessel for such an incredible experience for people? But I can only imagine that there is so much that of yourself that you must bring to that experience. Like, how does that feel? How does that kind of manifest itself in the kind of specifics of here's my job, here's how I do this, but also in the way you interact with the world?
Oh, wow. Thank you. I mean, I just need to say or speak the unspoken here that you're offering the same gift back to me right now, because you observed a dynamic that is very much a part of how I experience a table of women, I experience a room, and very few people observe it on a meta level the way you just did and would be able to describe it and reflect it back. So it's a gift what you just did for me. So thank you.
Yay.
What comes to, I mean, it's so many directions we can go to kind of go deeper into this. I guess when I ask myself what wants to be spoken in this space, the concept of unspokens comes up. It's something I speak to a lot. It's something that goes along with the idea of peacemaker tenets, which is this thing of more of us than you would believe are on the intuitive, well, everyone's on the intuitive spectrum, but more of us are advanced, especially in rooms of new paradigm thinkers, than we give ourselves credit for. And so there becomes this phenomenon of a collective buy-in to the unspokens in the room. We all kind of tacitly agree to the things we aren't going to talk about. Like there are the public taboos, like, we don't talk about sex, money, and politics or whatever in polite circles. I remember hearing that phrase as a child. But that goes so much deeper. We don't want to speak to our fears. We don't want to speak to our wounds. This links to something you just said around, our tendency to find ourselves stuck within the riverbanks of the binary, right? Which is the things I can say or I can't say, the things I am or I'm not, the things I'm showing or I'm hiding. It just happens to be that one aspect of my intuitive gift is seeing what we call the third door, which is the space that exists between that binary, and then speaking the unspoken present in that moment. So sometimes all I need to do, or all that happens within me when I'm at a table or I'm in a room or I'm in an individual session with the client, is to simply ask, what is the unspoken here? And then it just shows itself to me. The space I hold then is a space of discernment. Many of us, all of us, I think, in this society are raised in a culture of judgment. The binary has us asking the question, is it right or is it wrong? Is it good or is it bad? Is it healthy or is it toxic? Is it this or it's that, right? And that type of categorization is natural in our brains. But if you go back to, I'm thinking John Young and H. Shields here again in the deep nature connection community. But if we go back to our original instructions for that type of categorizing, that cataloging, that desire to understand the world, it actually is one not of judgment, but of discernment. Fennel and poison hemlock are what they call poisonous lookalikes, because they look alike in the landscape, but actually they just have different medicine, right? And we don't judge one plant versus another because of its medicine. We discern the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if we can bring that third door, that discernment in, what can happen in these spaces is we make room to be seen more authentically. We make room to speak the unspoken, and we make room to find resonance or unity in new ways. And so I love the work that I get to do. I couldn't find peace, honestly, Nikki, in my body, in my heart, and in my soul until I allowed that bridge walking to happen. When I allowed the intuitive to sit next to the strategist and the strategist to sit next to the intuitive, to name them side by side, intuitive strategy, and to be at peace with the discernment of what that alchemy meant, is when my cells stopped alarming and when my gifts heightened. And that is the space that I seek to sit in all spaces. Like you said, it was a dinner at a conference, but in that moment, that was what I could contribute and what I delighted in contributing. And when we're in alignment to that, it doesn't draw off of us. It acts like a little generative energy for all of us. So hopefully we all leave feeling a little more grounded, a little more seen, a little bit more connected, and ultimately refueled from inside. And that generative nature is so needed in our new paradigm spaces, because so many are burnt out, are tired, are not getting a return on their energy. So that was probably what was happening in that moment. And I'm really grateful that we got to share that experience.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Grateful, and grateful times a million. That was like next level. And it's funny, as you're saying this, I have this, a lot of times I feel like I get a movie that plays in my head, but there's all different parts, but I feel like there's this level of discord that this kind of high pitched noise that then gets quieted to allow, when you actually allow for those two, the intuitive and the strategist, next to one another. I had like this moment of when you know, in the movies, when the soundtrack is so loud and there's all this fighting or whatever, and then it just kind of calms to a stop and you're like, oh, okay, everything's okay right now. And the amount of us that are in that state of high volume discord and think it's our calm
Right.
is the burnout, right? It's that it's it's the baseline we've been operating as our starting point, when really our starting point is in such a healthier, more generative, more wellness focused space, rather than, okay, this is taking all of my life energy away from me, but I still have to go to work. So like, I'm going to start with what I have and try to do the most with the 50% that I've got left in my day, after the way that, you know, I was able to enter this day. And so the ability and the, I don't know, I know you talked about the leap and not necessarily leaping, but the permission that you give yourself to identify who you really are and take away all that kind of noise of shape-shifting, of, again, that kind of mask wearing dynamic of, I hope nobody sees that I feel like I don't belong as this version of myself that I'm told I have to be to survive here, but instead saying, okay, who am I? Let's start there. Let's not start with what do they want me to be, but like, who am I? And let me find who that person is, and see, is this okay? And actually allow myself to be in that, even if it comes with a little discomfort or a lot of discomfort. Is it someplace that can actually allow for I always think about it like a fuel tank, where I'm not burning so much fuel before I even start my journey. And I loved just, I feel so many folks that are listening to this podcast, my assumption is you're here because the idea of feeling like you have to twist yourself into a mold or a pretzel to be something else, or the idea that there isn't room for you to talk about who you are that's different from other people, resonates. That idea that you have the opportunity by identifying to release is like, it's like the key that you just keep shoving into all the wrong doors. And then you're like, oh, I didn't need to push that hard. It just fit perfectly. Like that's the
Needs
kind
less
of game
energy.
changing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we're in this moment right now, because there's a lot, I did not know much about mysticism in any kind of way. I remember this is 20, I think 17, the first dinner. This is a different dinner. We like to have dinner together.
Yeah.
And I remember having this moment of realizing that there is a whole other part of this existence that I was never even privy to. I didn't really grow up religious or spiritual in many ways. And so I remember it was a smaller dinner that we had, talking about seeing the world in a different way, different vision, different lens, different set of eyes, of the fact that there is so much more in that kind of intangible, the unspoken, but also the unseen space.
Yes.
And I feel like where we are right now is, and especially you'll know this much better than I do, but in what I've been learning is that we are entering a time for our humanity, civilization, to actually be embracing more of the unseen, the untangible things that we've always been like, well, if I can't see it and I don't have the data and the proof, then it's not real and it's minimized, or it's, it's a threat. I always think of like the whole take on, there's so many, the women's power dynamic of this is its own thing, but like how we thought of magic and witches being such a terrible thing, being so much of my life in Massachusetts and having the history of Salem witch trials and all of that being such a threat, the unseen and the unknown was such a threat. And we're stepping into a space and a time where, whether we are digging our heels in or not, there's like an opening for this to become part of our reality. And so how have you, you've been living, breathing, embracing this space and welcoming so many people into it. How do you see the fact that, like, as a collective, that door is opening, my friends? How do you see, like, for folks that are like, Nikki, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
How, welcome. This is going to be part of our living. It's going to be, at least for this lifetime on earth and beyond. How do you kind of approach that shift that's happening right now?
I love your take on this question. Bottom line is, I feel excited and optimistic. I mean, we're facing the biggest challenges humanity, like we're facing extinction crises across all three of our transformational levers. The three transformational levers that we talk about in my space are your health and well-being, relationships, and prosperity. Okay, those tend to be the three areas in life that spirit wakes us up, that we affect change. We're facing crises across all three of those on a human collective global level, right? We have a global pandemic. We're facing global climate shift. We're facing the rise of fascism. We're facing, every transformational lever is really going through massive shift. And we can look at that as a complete crumbling, or we can look at it like I try to look at, which is like a raking of the sands. It is destabilizing, 100%. I don't want anybody, especially not the spiritual among us, to be bypassing. This is a time for eyes wide open, face our fears. The forecast for 2022 specifically, like, we are facing our fears together as a collective, whether we like it or not. But the goal is not to bypass, to rise above the fear, to dismiss it. It's actually to invite it to the table and to say, all right, what do you have to show me? What do you have to tell me? Your question is just so beautifully constructed, because I do feel optimism. 10 years ago, I might have been saying to clients like, yes, you feel different. Yes, you feel other. Yes, you have unique gifts. You can still thrive. You can still find your way. Now I'm saying, this is your time. You came in for this moment. The way in which you have felt hamstrung or held back in your industry, your field, your niche, is actually now your superpower. Now it is your job, again, to not be complicit in our own subjugation. Take your own mask off. Take your own foot off the brake. Start to challenge yourself. Is it really the boss, the organization, the niche, society that's doing it at this point? Or where are you still holding on? Because it is absolutely your time. The forecast, the predictions, the astrology, like whatever facet of mysticism like speaks to your original instruction, are all consistent in their message. This is the time of the shift of consciousness. This is literally the time that I believe probably everyone who finds themselves listening to this was born for. So it's an opportunity more than anything else. I found myself on a Zoom call, a celebration of life for the author of Sacred Commerce, Ayman Swaf, a dear friend and mentor just yesterday, a global family coming together essentially on this celebration of life call, where the level of bridge walking, peacemaking, of the ability to stand in truth in the light of global events while also holding a vision of hope and inspiration was the most powerful thing I've been a part of in a long time. He continues to be a change maker from his transcended state, whatever lens you believe around that. But the truth is, that's, I think, the opportunity for all of us right now. How do we face what we're facing together without falling into despair or despondency? Who will hold the vision of what it could look like if it's not all of us? Who will open those doors? Who will design that pathway? Who will create that strategy if it isn't us?
Yeah.
So I feel incredibly excited. I also did not grow up in a religious household per se. My parents were raised Roman Catholic, but they felt strongly they wanted their children to find their own way to spirituality. I desperately craved it. I would go to whatever religious ceremony I could go to with friends. I loved being in sacred spaces. I lived in Geneva, Switzerland as a little girl and had the opportunity to be in cathedrals and churches around Europe from all different faiths. And as a sensitive, you can feel a sacred space when you walk into it. And so I believe part of our work as new paradigm thinkers or mystics, however you identify, is to begin to erase the line between the sacred and the mundane and to make all things sacred. When you're doing your financial planning, can you light a candle? When you're about to have a strategy meeting, could you also take a breath first? We could go on and on, allowing for the full integration of our intellect and our intuition. I believe that's the new paradigm definition of knowing. I believe that's a facet of discernment. And for us to really get where we're meant to go together as a human collective, it will be a yes and, not an either or. It will be inviting back to the table our intuitive knowing selves right alongside our beautiful gifts for inquiry, curiosity, and intellect.
There's a part of this that I feel like keeps coming up. This is the part where I was saying before we talked, I was like, how I was introduced to a person through an email and I listened to a 14-minute podcast episode. And in this podcast episode, what she was talking about was the idea that in order to step into what is a healthy form of, and I'll say a new paradigm form, she didn't use that language, but a form of actually having a healthy dynamic with the way that we transact and really having it be more transformational and having it be more about that energetic exchange than the tangible money, was about this feeling of embracing the fact that you're meant to be who you are. You're meant to step into that part of yourself that always felt like it didn't fit the leadership mold, because without you doing that, who will illustrate that that is what leadership looks like? Who will show that this is what success can be? This is how we can step into and have energy regenerating instead of being completely sucked dry. And it is such a powerful thing, because I do still feel like while all of these things are happening, we still have people that are grasping as tight as can be to what was. And a lot of those folks are still in positions of power and have their hands on the wheels or the levers of most of our systems of oppression. And so as much as we want to step into those elements of ourselves that kind of go against the way things have been, we're still being met with that level of resistance that's like driving with your parking brake on. And so really, I think I love so much that you were talking about that idea of bypassing, because I do think sometimes when we can see something, we see what's coming, we're like, okay, cool, let's get there. And it's like, no, we have to, where we are right now is still very real. And for us to act as though the challenges that we have are gone actually hinders our ability to step into the strength, the power, the opportunity that's coming for us. And so I wonder how when when you're thinking about all of this expansive shift induced new, I just think of it as like this beautiful verdant ground that we've never even seen the beautiful color that it will be, right? How do we both hold that future, that reality, and navigate those that are trying their best to survive what they know, not even realizing that so much of that time is actually harming themselves in the process?
Yeah.
um how do you kind of, how do you personally, I guess, how do you think about that? And then when you're working with people that are navigating kind of, I'm in these systems that are still stuck
Oh,
a
yeah.
long time ago, but I see the future. How do I allow myself to live in the discernment and the in between without getting completely sucked dry by the, this is the way things are, this is the way things will always be kind of messaging?
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, first of all, everything you're saying is just true. There's, for as much as I am heartened by a belief and a knowing that we have a tremendous amount of opportunity right now, what the mystic spaces will also tell you, including astrological forecasts and all that, is that the future is unwritten. We are operating right now at a fulcrum point of humanity, and it is not assured what way anything is going to go. But rather than see that as defeatist, I am choosing to see that as a call to action. If not now, then when? Because there is a window of opportunity that is closing. And the systems of oppression are real. The white knuckling of those trying to hold on to power is real. The backlash from those of us who are trying to disrupt those systems, the backlash against that is real. So all of that is very real. Two things come to mind when I sit with your question here, Nikki. One is, I myself tend to use a framework to guide me in my own actions that help keep me aligned, grounded, sane, and of service. And that is a model of trying to look at what I do each and every day through the lens of the inner, the outer, and the higher. What can I do first within myself? Again, to keep untangling unconscious bias, to keep untangling my own subjugation to complicity in my own subjugation, what I'm doing to unravel my own self-harm, like whatever extraction is still existing in me, I am actively asking the questions and challenging myself to extract, to pull that out, like the hydra from within myself, to remove it from self. So that's the inner component. On the outer, we keep showing up for conversations like this. We keep doing the work we're meant to do. We keep doing the hard iterative work of our soul purpose, because what your soul purpose was 5 years ago is likely not looking exactly the same way as it is now. We're not going back to the before times. There is no going back.
Yeah.
We are forging forward. So continue to challenge yourself on the outer realm to be showing up in alignment with your gifts, your truth, your knowing. And then the third part of that inner, outer, higher framework is the higher part. Where can you tap into whatever version of faith, trust, or knowing works for you? Where can you hand over to a higher power or to whatever it is, so that you can give yourself a break to recharge and rest, so that the weight of the world is not on you at all times? This can look like funny movies and laughter. This can look like ceremony and ritual. Like whatever it is for you is just wonderful. I just ask that you have something that brings in an element of each of those things: the inner work, the outer work, and the higher work. That's what I do myself, and I try to model for my children, for my clients, for my community. The other piece that comes to mind, I taught a course a couple of years ago called The Alchemy of Chaos, especially coming through the Trump years, and just that despondency, especially that was rippling through the divine feminine. Again, not gendered, like anyone who has tapped into generative heart space was experiencing tremendous grief during those years.
Yeah.
And so the alchemy of chaos work, one of the things we talked about is identify yourself somewhere in the space of, are you on the ground in a tactical space, or are you at a meta level in a strategic space? Most of us are both in some way, but the tools for resourcing generative energy are slightly different based on those. If you're a person who is tactical, this is the kind of person where we tend to experience the type of burnout, which is exhaustion or overexertion, right? Because it's like you're at a very, very fast pace and it's creating burnout. The other one, the higher the meta, the experience tends to be more of a despondency because things move very slowly there. Change isn't happening soon enough. It may never happen. Policy doesn't change. Legislation doesn't change. We have to wait for another 4-year cycle. So first you identify which one of those, or in what ways are you both? Because if you're at that burnout vibration, getting the big picture can really help. Find a way to volunteer that's more at that high level view. Just getting that bird's eye view will calm down that part of you that's experiencing the fast paced burnout. If the reverse is true and you spend most of your time at that layer that takes longer and is slower, get your boots on the ground. Get to the food kitchen, go out to the march, like do something on the streets that gets you that view of where it's happening more quickly. And if you can identify a couple of core routines that allow you to experience both, we can guard ourselves against the type of harm that these chaotic shifting times produce in us. And we guard ourselves a bit from that broad swing, that almost manic swing between anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout, and on the other end of the spectrum, despondency, depression, and stagnation. And you can begin to find a fulcrum and a discernment of balance in the middle that serves your constitution. And again, that's going to tie into your authentic self. It's going to tie into your own purpose. But that is the sweet spot, the survivalist sweet spot right now that I have found to kind of continue to navigate these times of change.
The thing that keeps there's just so much profound stuff you're just dropping. Like, it's like, oh yeah, 2 minutes ago, she dropped that thing that made my mind go, whoa. And then, so one of the pieces that keeps coming through the responses you're having, and then I get excited about something else, is the fact that so many of us that have felt like we don't belong, or have felt like we've been left behind, or have felt like there was harm done to us, there's a level of resilience that has been built from surviving that. And so I think of, as you're talking about that kind of center point of how you survive this moment and how you pull from those experiences of both being, I have a whole episode about the eagle and mouse mode. So the strategic versus tactical.
Yeah, great.
I used to talk about my corporate time as being a hamster in the hamster wheel, where you're just running, but you're not getting anywhere. Like all of those feelings, I feel like we've had them in some way, shape, or form, likely show up in our lives every day, somehow, some way.
Yes.
And again, it reminds me of that discord calming of like identifying them actually gives us a lot of power. Opening the door and looking and seeing, oh, there's no boogeyman there. It's just a sweater. Like that whole idea of taking what is so charged and uncertain and allowing ourselves to see it a little bit more. We might not have the answer, but to see it a little bit more clearly gives us the opportunity to say, oh, this isn't futile. Right. I'm not just getting hit by every wave that crashes. It's not that I don't have any control. And it's funny, oftentimes when I'm doing, especially diversity, equity, and inclusion work, or talking specifically about race and racial dynamics of oppression, there tends to be this feeling of either I am in complete and utter control. Everything I do has the potential to solve racism. Shouldn't laugh. It's a part of the experience it happens for people. Yes. And then it swings to futility of, well, there's nothing I can do. This has been going on forever. What do I matter? My contribution doesn't matter. And both of those things are unrealistic and are easy outs, of like, well, I have all the control. And so therefore I have no control. And how that just creates, again, for me, all of these swings just result in dehumanization. Because as human beings, we're not all or nothing of any of these things. And so how we create space for those things to pop up in different places and be like, oh, hello. Yes, come back here. I actually know how to navigate this. And for those of us that have trauma in our past or in our present, we have a level of resilience that we've learned, whether we've been given permission to acknowledge it or not, that allows us to navigate chaos in a different kind of way. And so that is part of why the othering conversation, because people, especially people that might not know me, are like, why are you talking about that? This is, again, this is not what we talk about in polite company. I'm like, yeah, oftentimes when I talk to people, we talk about death and grief. They're like, oh, we don't do that. Like, it's, those are the types of things that allow us to activate so many other parts of our humanity that are in the in-between and the nuance, and allow for our discernment to rise and shine and connect one another. So
Yep.
as we think of resilience,
Yep.
as we think of our collective trauma we're in right now,
Yep.
one of the pieces that, again, if anybody listens to this and doesn't know that I am a huge Lindsay Pera fan, go back, listen again, get back here, and then you'll know. One of the things that blew me away was early in COVID, how open and honest you were with your experience of experiencing COVID. It was March 2020, right?
Friday, March 13th,
Oh,
2020, my son came home from Santa Barbara College with COVID, which was stunning, into a home with chronic illness, into a home that had been tracking it back to December and had our eyes wide open.
oh,
It turned out a friend of his girlfriend was on a abroad program in Italy, and they were sent home from Italy and brought COVID to our little town on the Central Coast via us. I mean, we didn't pass it outside of this, but yes, COVID landed in our house March 13th, 2020.
and I remember seeing, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're in this TV culture where we're so used to like seeing
Right.
all the things that nobody really sees in real life. And so we just assume that's what we're getting. And then,
Right.
social media creates everybody's own
Right.
sitcom / drama series. But your willingness to bring what was, I can only imagine, a really difficult experience for you and your family to be navigating, especially if you were part of what unfortunately wasn't our large collective in America, of watching it happen with a
Right.
very attentive eye, having that happen, but also at the same time, your willingness to be speaking out about that and sharing your experiences, for me personally, was the thing that made COVID real. Because I do feel like for so many people, people didn't know people with COVID, or they knew what, okay, is this real? Is this not? Is this really happening to people? Is this, made up? And you were so generous in, one, sharing your experiences, but I also think, two, creating space for saying, okay, it's not one or the other. There's some in between. There are ways for us to figure it out. And we're constantly learning this every moment. And so I'd love to hear how, one, I know 2 years ago, that was a very heightened moment, but also the fact that we're experiencing the after effects and the very real realities of long COVID symptoms. How has that experience played into so much of what I feel like you are uniquely so wise about anyway, but your willingness to share it with the world, how has that kind of reflected humanity's reaction to this stuff? I think of it as such a wonderful window into how we navigate where we are right now and where we're going too. So if there's any, I know I asked like 7 questions in that, but there was so much of a gift that you offered. And also I feel like a blueprint that, I don't know, maybe you probably already have it all down on paper already, but that is coming out of this experience.
Well, let me just bounce the fan club ball right back in your court, because I'm such a you fan.
I can't do that.
I just have to pause in this moment to say what was a core routine for me of being interviewed weekly, if not multiple times a week before COVID. I think I have taken 3 interviews, this being the 3rd since COVID. That's how much COVID has changed my life and impacted my life. Everything about my life has changed in this last couple of years, from running conferences, running retreats, running masterminds. I do feel I'm fortunate as an intuitive that I felt what was coming before I knew what it was. So I didn't have big events to cancel in 2022. I had claimed somewhat of a sabbatical for myself. But I will tell you, as you hear me sit with your questions, that the answers will not kind of flow as seamlessly because I haven't spoken about this, Nikki. I haven't really allowed myself to be asked these questions yet. And everything you just said is so true and so big and so nuanced and so still very real for me. Because yes, we have been a family that has dealt with chronic illness. I did eventually, I mentioned earlier, experiencing a health crisis that led to this change in my life and livelihood. Well, at the time of the birth of my third child, we were finally found our way to an infectious disease specialist who said, there's just little things going on in all of you. Let's test all of you. And we found out that we as a family were dealing with chronic Lyme disease, which carried with it a tremendous amount of, you mentioned, grief and trauma, because ultimately I passed Lyme disease to 2 of my 3 children. And so there was, it was a tremendous journey finding our individual way as a family, each of us in our own way back to remission and to healing. So we had a vocabulary for individual healing. We had a vocabulary for holistic health. We had journeyed intimately with the failures of the healthcare system in the United States. And so then, yes, we had our eyes on this pandemic brewing, and I'm an intuitive, feeling that this wasn't something to be dismissed, that this was actually a part of the shift of human existence. And so there was not an appetite in the general population or even in the mystic population for subscribing to that. It was dismissed as fear-based thinking, as negative, limiting vibrations. And I maintained what my truth was, that I saw something very big and very disruptive. I had very clear dreams and nightmares where we were all being forced back into our homes and the lights were going off. There was interesting things happening. And then, yes, it landed in our home, which for the stronger among us was a very uncomfortable, very novel virus that we moved our way through. But for 2 of us with the longer impacts of autoimmune and chronic illness has now become a journey that we are still on 2 years later. Almost 2 years to the week, my same now end of college age son just got tested COVID positive again at college. And we made the decision to bring him home again. So he isolated, and it did not move through the family this time, which I'm truly grateful for. But yes, to even examine this journey for me is still very new and very raw. I was stunned, to be just totally frank, at the way this collective experience shifted the dynamics in our political discourse, the way in which the far right and the far left became unified in a belief system, the ways in which we continued to choose division instead of unity in finding solutions, the way in which it highlighted our ableist tendencies to be dismissive of entire swaths of the population. So what you're describing as courage in being transparent, I have a daily gratitude practice. It's a core routine of mine to use that platform to be authentic and transparent about what I'm journeying. That wasn't new. Was it courage? I would actually say it was probably more naivete, because I didn't anticipate just how divisive it was all going to get. I don't know any other way at this point than to be transparent about my journey. It's what I do. I learned a lot through that process, like we all did. I wouldn't change a thing. We had the opportunity to share a holistic protocol that blended a lot of different traditions, because within our own family unit, our bodies are so constitutionally different that different pathways always had to be used. So we were already accustomed to this idea of different people would respond different ways to the same challenge. And producing that protocol and just putting it on a free Google Doc and sharing it meant that it's now been shared, tens of thousands of times. And it helped a lot of people avoid that binary space of you treat it, you don't treat it, it's real or it's not real. Even in the presence of that protocol, we ourselves lost family members. We lost friends, community members. So it's very much tangled up in trauma and grief, but it also is an example of doing what you can with what you've got from a place of service and releasing yourself from the judgments of those for whom it does not resonate, and staying steadfast in the faith that it will find its way to those for whom it will be of service. And that's the path I tried to walk, and I continue to try to walk in this conversation around COVID.
Thank you so much for, first of all, thank you so much for sharing all that. And second of all, I've shared that. I was a couple of those shares. And as much as there's been so much conversation, well, now apparently there's no conversation about COVID, which is its own disorienting thing.
Right.
But as much as there was conversation, seemingly inundating conversation about COVID, when you were in the reality of it, there was a level of silence.
No
And
testing available. I mean, I wasn't even fully eyes wide open to what a stigma there would be. I mean, oddly enough, the whole story for another day, but we are a family who has been targeted before because of chronic illness. My daughter was essentially kicked out of her preschool because a parent called the school and the health department and the CDC to say that we had some transmissible disease. And, it was Lyme disease, but, it was fear on the part of the parent and the school. But like, this has happened twice in our life. And so you'd think I would have been more attuned to the stigma that would go along with what, is a global pandemic. But honestly, I was operating from a place of my own survival, a mama bear energy for my own children, and wanting anything that could help anyone who was seeking help to be out there. It is, the cognitive dissonance around this entire experience, as you said, including the silence today, is let's just say it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good word. It's a good word. And I feel like it feels so weird to say it will be a good reference point for how we resolve uncertainty moving forward. But it feels like a reference point is such a minimization of the kind of monstrosity that we're still in the midst of right now.
Absolutely.
So you touched a little bit on this, and I am like, for going a little bit longer than usual because I want to talk to you about all the things. But one of the things that I was so intrigued about the last time we spoke was the reflection on how we're in such a time where we're stepping into, hopefully as a collective, more comfort with working with people that are healers, are in the mystical space, or in, at least for people that don't know what healers and mystical means, wellness. Hopefully that's something that's familiar for you. There's a level of realization that we need people that can care for us where our systems are not. And as there was all of this divisive messaging and a lot of propaganda-esque talk, there was definitely I'll say a division in the wellness industry that I don't know if I was in my own little bubble, so I didn't know it as much until I started seeing kind of larger prominent people saying things and being like, wait a second, the last time I saw you speaking, I was like, sounded pretty like, I don't know, nuanced and well thought, and there was critical thinking, and now all of a sudden, what just happened? So can you talk a little bit about how the wellness industry has been impacted over the last 5, probably more, I don't know, years in, I know specifically the QAnon dynamics, conspiracy of it all, for folks that are in QAnon probably don't call it a conspiracy, but how there has just been this ideological infusion in a space that has made things kind of dystopian in its own weird way.
Absolutely. Well put. It's still mind-blowing to me. I'll be totally honest. I mean, I had shifted from my early entrepreneur years, in creating apps in our software company for chronic illness. So I was speaking day in and day out in the holistic wellness space. I had shifted more into the entrepreneur space by this time. I am what I consider to be kind of at a phase in my career where I'm focusing on that and less on the kind of boots on the ground in holistic wellness. But it was absolutely stunning to me to see the phenomenon that you're describing. One of the most prominent voices in women's health went so far into QAnon. It actually felt like some kind of personal betrayal for me as someone who had followed her work since I was a little girl. And others modeled for all of us courageously speaking their truths in contrast to that. Lissa Ranka comes to mind. Lissa Rankin was also baffled by this and also held a space of deep curiosity. How is this happening? Trying to maintain a peacemaking bridge, but also as a physician calling out the pieces that she felt could potentially do harm. I was heartened by the courage that I saw within that peership of speaking the unspokens. What does this mean for holistic health going forward? What does it mean for us now? I think if I boil it all down, it's just underscoring the part of our conversation earlier where we stress the importance of discernment. I can't pretend to tell someone else what their belief system should be or what is right for them. What I can do is continue to try to ask the questions that bring in their own deepest level of discernment. And if you can intersect that with the willingness to be highly self-critical, and by critical, I mean observant, of where fear is showing up. I hope that through that combination, we get to a place where we can come to a more universal understanding of collective health. Right now, I don't believe we are any closer than we were a year or 2 years ago. I think we're going to continue to see much work needing to be done in this place. We are still, especially in the United States, in a country where the most common cause of bankruptcy is health challenges within a family unit or a household. We have so far to go to get to basic levels of humanity and compassion when it comes to disability, illness, whatever it is that we're facing. So that tells me we have a lot of work to do. From that lens, I believe the coronavirus and COVID-19 were actually a tremendous gift that we are having to, again, as a collective, face our fears together and do big work to address what has been fundamentally broken. Remember those 3 transformational levers? This is our health and well-being lever on a collective scale. Beyond that, I'm a person who continues to look for the miracles, to pray for awakening, to hold people in the highest of their ability to shift and change, for all of us to claim the opportunities to say, I was wrong, or I made a mistake, or I see things in a new light now. I am a person who loves to offer a lot of grace to myself and others for forgiveness, and believe that we can all learn and we can all continue to move forward in a good way. But it's a very complex question that you ask, and it's one near and dear to my heart that I'll be continuing to sit with in sacred inquiry, I think, for a long while.
Well, thank you so much for exploring that. I feel as though, as we're talking about so many kind of different aspects of our human existence right now, there is a spotlight that keeps coming in and out around if you are somebody that has a difficult time trusting your intuitive hits,
Right.
what your values are versus the values of the person that you've been following. I feel like as you're talking about following someone since you're a little girl, having so much trust, or even if it's the way that your parents operate, or it's the way that your community operates, and it all of a sudden is no longer in alignment with like the core part of yourself and what you value, how do you prioritize or trust that part of yourself when you've been operating in a society that tells you you can't trust yourself, that
Right.
instead of trusting yourself, buy this thing, it will solve it,
Yeah.
or that imposter syndrome is that's how you should be operating, that is the frequency that your robotic version of yourself should be operating from. So as we're talking about understanding the fact that it's safe and okay, I shouldn't say safe, depends on where you are, but it is helpful to give yourself permission to see who you are outside of what other people are identifying you as, and to trust the things that are in kind of that the kind of inner wisdom, the wise self that is within you.
Yep.
And if that is the first time you're doing it because you're so used to defaulting to other people who have power, a platform, a microphone, letters at the end of their name, how it can be actually turning it on its head and saying, you are the wisest person. You have lived and breathed every moment of your life. You are the only person who has witnessed every experience that you have. So how do you trust that self to be able to kind of dictate and give you your internal compass instead of relying on external feedback and external direction
Yep.
to lead you on your path out of what are, we're watching systems crumble everywhere. We're watching people stumble and fall. And what I find, which I love so much, is you're talking about holding space for miracles and forgiveness and grace, is also the willingness to, I always think, even if I don't agree with you, if you're able to say, I was wrong or I learned, to me, that is a level of strength and is a level of respect that I give so many people, because we are not taught, especially in American culture, that it is okay for you to change your mind. It is okay for you to stumble and fall. It is okay for you to have been wrong. Those are not things that, and again, I think of it as our traditional masculine, and the really unhealthy dynamic of you need to be certain, you can't be curious, you can't be evolving, you can't be adapting, but also our bodies are changing at all times. Our cells are divided. Like, this is what's happening in real life, but we are anchoring into, I said it this way, it will always be this way, and I can't change my mind. And so the ability to trust ourselves and witness that evolution, and also give the grace to other people and the compassion to other people, but also to ourselves, that all of those things can be happening at once while the world is going through its own shedding of skin. I think is so important and powerful.
I mean, everything you said is so spot on and so true. And I am 100% with you. And I also just have to speak the unspoken, that within the tangle of conspiracy theory, and so, for example, QAnon, that is also the place from which those believers are acting, a feeling that for the first time they felt a resonance, knowing inside that this was true. So it's a shadow and light of the exact same dynamic, which is part of what makes it so incredibly tricky, and what makes core routines matter, which was what makes discernment matter, which means understanding the difference between truth and knowing and other things. I mean, I think it's so important to understand that we are on a slippery, delicate slope. If you're brand new to the intuitive arts or to the lost arts or to energetics, that if you have not done the deep work of unpacking your own inherent bias, your own trauma, your own wounding, there is a very high likelihood you are going to be misunderstanding the cues. And what feels like resonance from something like a conspiracy theory may actually be the resonance of your own fear systems within that need to get detangled. So everything you said is true. And that's exactly also the challenge we're facing. I have never pulled out my own book in an interview before, but I just want to offer this, because one of the things that happened for me when I was writing The Mystic's Path was exactly what just happened to us in this conversation, which is everything can be true through one lens. But if we also haven't done the work, I can inadvertently perpetuate harm. And I don't want to do this. So at the beginning of my book, there's this short little section that says on how to use this book. And it basically says, use what's for you and let the other stuff go. But the next thing I say is the Mystic's Manifesto. And this was my desperate attempt, Nikki, to try to somehow grapple with what you just highlighted. And so I'm just going to read a few of them, but it's things like, we are all, these are truisms I'm asking us to hold as we walk on a mystic's path. We are all connected. This one came out of your own mouth in this conversation.
Mhm.
There are seen and unseen forces at play. Seek to amplify light and love. What we do for the one, we do for the all. That's almost exactly the QAnon motto, I should add, which is fascinating, right? What we
Wow.
do for the one, the inner work, we do for the all. Very similar to how that got applied.
Yeah.
Mentor and be mentored, which is protection against guruism. As long as you are always learning, you can also be teaching. But when we fail to continue to learn, we run into all kinds of traps and hazards. It goes on and on. Do no harm, assume positive intent, hold peacemaker vows, on and on and on. But the point is, this is a delicate space. What has been hidden because of patriarchy, oppressive religious systems, colonization, toxic capitalism, what has been pushed underground is trying to resurface.
Mm.
COVID has been a bit like a poultice, pulling up to the top what needs to be healed. So we need to slow things down to relearn our powers of intuition and discernment. You described so beautifully the distinction between the loud, the chaos, the urgency, and that distillation into something calm. I've never described it that way, but that's a perfect description of one of the tools you can use energetically to identify an authentic knowing and intuition from a fear-based one.
Mm.
If it feels like this, I have to do it, we're in danger, fight at all costs, sit with it longer, keep unpacking it. If it lands here, gotta leave this room, must exit this space. This is not right for me. This is right for me. If it is a distillation in a form of quiet, it is much more likely to be authentic intuition.
Yeah.
If it is running the frequencies of otherism or fear or chaos, sit with it longer till you find that clarity. So yeah, resilience work matters. As leaders, we must encourage ourselves and others to include trauma-informed everything at this point. Make room for grief in every room. If that means allowing people to have the time that they need, great, in terms of HR policies or how people show up at work. If it means the mystical, have a grief bowl in the room and learn some rituals and practices for helping grief move. These are going to be essential tools of leadership going forward. We are not separate from trauma.
Yeah.
Any one of us, whether we're talking individual, collective, ancestral, it is up right now.
Yes.
So these are tools that we have to learn in order to do exactly what you described, which is identify that true inner knowing without falling prey to our own bias or wounds.
I feel like I just went through an entire, I don't know, semester of education in this last hour. There's so much that we talked about, and I also know there's so much that we didn't. What I will tell listeners that are, I hope, just as excited for you getting to hang out with Lindsay as I am, that one of the things I have thought has been such a wonderful gift. And of course, I'm always like, how does she know? Are those daily Oracle pulls that you have from your Oracle deck that you share on social media. And so for those of you that are like, I want to hear from Lindsay more, I feel like that is one of the most generous gifts that is, because I feel like sometimes you wake up in the morning like, how am I don't know, where do I, and the ability to dive into the wisdom that you're bringing to the forefront, but also the curiosity and the questions that you're bringing up so we can actually get in tune to ourselves is such a wonderful gift. And so I encourage people to definitely follow you for that. And then also your gratitude, you talked about your gratitude ritual before, and I have never witnessed somebody that has been so consistent in their gratitude work. And it is something that I find so beautiful. And it's something that, is aspirational in a whole bunch of ways. And so my gratitude today is seeing you for sure. And I am just like, I don't know, there's just a level of hope that I have for the future after talking with you that's different than the hope I had before I entered into our wonderful space. And And for all of you listening, like, please, I know I share with you and all of our guests to connect, but please go follow Lindsay's work. There is just so much opportunity and space for us to be connected right now. So I'm excited about that. Lindsay, is there anything else that you're feeling called to share or you'd like to share with everybody for all of my go hang out with Lindsay messaging that I just dropped here?
No, I will just, I guess I'll circle back to one of the core routines in my own community, which is we probably stirred up a lot in this conversation. So I just want to put my hand to your heart, anyone out there for whom this brought up a lot, and invite you to actually move your body a little after this conversation, maybe a little shimmy or shake or shuggle, ability to shake off anything that we may have stirred up that maybe isn't for you. Let that just release, and then an openness to receive whatever pieces might actually be needed and wanted for you and your walk in the world right now. Just take that one piece for you, and know that I'm sending so much love.
Lindsay, I want to do this for like every day. But thank you so much for joining today. And we didn't even talk about one of my favorite things, which is the alchemy of envy that you taught me. I will make sure to find that episode if it's still out there in the world and put it in the show notes for everybody that deals with envy, jealousy, anything along those lines. Lindsay blew my mind. It was so before all those dinners, that was the first time I ever heard your voice.
It's one of the biggest tools of oppression and patriarchy, is convincing you that your desires are bad or a sin, or all of the things that we've been conditioned to believe they are. So yes, reclaiming and allowing for the alchemy of envy is a really powerful tool. And we should have that conversation someday. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. We'll just have to do another little one. All right, cool. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks. Thank you.
Now, if you just listened to that episode and you are feeling so wonderfully full of information, of encouragement, of wisdom, of maybe a feeling that you haven't felt before, you're not alone. As Lindsay mentioned towards the end of the episode, be sure to give yourself permission to shake off the things that weren't for you, to give yourself permission to breathe, to try to process all of the wisdom that was just dropped in this episode. We'll include all of the links that Lindsay talks about and some links for you to follow. I know I mentioned her Oracle deck pulls. They are incredibly powerful, and I highly recommend for you to follow Lindsay to see those every day. She talked about some of her book she talked about, which I thought was so beautiful when she pulled in a segment of that book to help kind of demystify the difference between following your intuitive path and understanding where things like QAnon and conspiracy theory type based wellness rhetoric, how you can kind of differentiate between those two, because so often they use the same lingo and the same language. What we're learning is that we are in a time where language is being used and misused and disused. Information and truth are being stretched and used in different ways to make different points from the same seemingly universal set of facts, but being skewed through various lenses. And so I really encourage you to not only use the rituals and the processes that Lindsay mentioned towards the end to have this entire conversation kind of pass through your body, and the things that were intended to stay with you, and the things that were not, to shake off. But I also encourage you to bring that into your life as you're consuming so much information that is constantly being thrown at us. We are not meant to absorb everything. We are not meant to know everything. We are not meant to not know everything and then default to other people. I really encourage you to trust who you are. Trust what feels that kind of calm, that feels that strength, that feels that intuitive expansion, and to understand where fear and constriction have been ruling your life, and see if there's the opportunity to release some of that. My friends, I'm sure that there's stuff that you are feeling coming out of this, and if there's something you want to share, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can go to nikkyinnocent.com/podcast, and there is a link called Join the Conversation. You can give us your insights and your thoughts there. You can review us on your favorite podcast platform, or if you prefer to just email us, you can go to info@nikkyinnocent.com and let us know what you thought about this episode. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I am just so excited that you got to meet Lindsay.